leave to a pandemic. So I haven't actually gone back to the office, but I've been working for about 2 months now, back from maternity leave. I have two boys. I have a almost 4-year-old, so a 3-year-old boy and a 10-month-old boy who's already walking. So it's a lot of butt wiping duty in my home. I'm at that age. I'm at that stage. So and I'll just open with, that was my family life. I thought I had pretty good work-life balance, and I was very open with my bosses. Obviously, they knew I was pregnant. I had both of my kids since I've been with AP. So, there was like really no secret. Everyone knew I had kids. I'd written essays about Asian American identity and parenting. So it was, people talked to me about this. I was also a national education reporter covering, one of the things I covered was early education. So I wrote about daycares and going back to school. So this is something, this used to be something that is just completely saturating my orbit. And I think, I've had a pretty good support system among my editors, and I work with, editors from across the country. Everyone is still really supportive of, they understand, coming back from leave and just working in general with kids. Most of my editors have kids, young kids. So I think that has helped. And we also have CeFaan Kim. Xuan, you want to take a spin? Tell us what your situation has been?
Yeah, I'm Stefan Kim. I'm a reporter at WBC TV in New York City, much like Sally in Seattle and in Florida, New York obviously being a pretty hot spot. I have a 20-month-old daughter. So much like Sally, I'm sort of in the middle of all this. Like, we just had my daughter enrolled in pre-K in September, and that's gone sideways, as you can all imagine. So I'm going to sort of give you guys the father perspective of this. Clearly not nearly as difficult as being the mom. But like Sally mentioned, first and foremost, it really helps that I had a company that I work for who's been super supportive from day one. Anything I needed when it came to family, they put that first. And I have an amazing wife that is holding it down. So without those two things, like, I could do none of this. And so hopefully from there, we can jump off into a 5-minute discussion about how hard it's been.
I'll go ahead and introduce myself. I'm Xuan Thai. I'm a producer with NBC News. I'm based in the Miami bureau. So where Sally was sort of in Seattle, and that was kind of the origination of where the hot spot was, and then CeFaan is in New York, where it then went to, I'm now in Florida, where it is now. So, we're living all stages of it here. So it's been actually kind of great and really difficult all at once, sort of similar to what Sally and CeFaan are saying. And I've been lucky where NBC decided to keep everybody home for their safety right away. And in the first few months of it, I think we were all just trying to figure out what was going on, and it was really overwhelming. I think it was just it was so much and so hard, just because we just didn't know what was going on and what our own expectations of work were for us, and then our expectations of home life. And so I think those initial months were really difficult trying to find the balance, but we're kind of in a groove now. And then I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. So my 4-year-old turns 5 next month. And so she actually goes back to school, and we made that decision because she's in a small little Montessori, and it's 6 people, masks, dividers, and we can talk about that later. But for us, it was important for her to sort of normalize her life. And that was kind of the struggle, I think, throughout this 5-month period so far, is finding normalcy for them and for us, because nothing about this is normal. Yeah.
Can you talk about, your parenthood identity at work? Like, were you working from home at all before this? Were you like talking to your bosses about this before the pandemic? Is that something that was sort of part of your work identity?
Right. So that's a tough one, because I am a field producer. So that means I'm on the road a lot. I'm platinum on every hotel brand, basically. And I have struggled. I mean, this pandemic has been, this work from home thing has sort of been a blessing for me, because it's given me what I wanted, which was more time with my kids. So my work knows that I have children, but I don't talk about it. It's not my identity, because there is that balance, particularly for women who, when you have children, I think there's oh, she's on the mommy track now. But you don't want to be on the mommy track. You want to be the I also have kids track, that your life is richer because you have children. So that might just be my own paranoia, but if you look around in the newsroom, there aren't very many parents in the newsroom, but particularly women, because after a certain age, I think they start kind of looking around to see what else is out there to give that work-life balance. And I think one of the things that this pandemic and work from home has taught for us is that it is possible to work from home and do what we do to some extent. I'm not saying every day, but it is possible to find that mix for everybody.
What has the story coverage been like? How have you seen your unique perspective as a working mom journalist that's infused into the report on NBC?
Well, I'll tell you, for instance, today I was having a conversation with a nightly senior about trying to do a story on parents who have to send their children back. There is no choice because they are essential workers. We're asking all these people to be essential workers, from our grocery store person to our doctor on the front line. But we have not thought about the back end of it, of childcare. And a lot of folks don't have the gift that I have, which is help. My parents live nearby, and because they're older, we have not relied on them because we don't want to expose them, because my husband and I are both still going out, but we can pay for help because we're lucky enough to afford that, we can continue working. But there are families out there who cannot afford that. And I think that has been a privilege that we've kind of glossed over in the discussion of let's push the fact that that we're reopening schools too soon. But we also need to, look at the side of some families rely on this, whether for lunch benefits, for safety for children with social services, or just care for childcare. And I'm sure there's not a single one of us on this Zoom call right now who doesn't think this is a little too much time with my kids.
It's definitely hard to balance because, I feel like it's great that I get to be with my kids more, but then also I feel like I'm yelling at them a lot more. And that's just a struggle for me because I'm what good is it having all this time with them if I'm not actually present, if I'm not, if I'm not being a good mom. And that's something I struggle with. I'm not sure that there are answers, but I do feel like, it's too easy to forget that everyone is in this place. Like I said, most of the editors I work with, they have young children at home. I mean, it's not, it's sort of this is the standard now, and we need to catch up to that. We need to accept that times are different, and, people get that you might have to, take a 2-hour break to deal with something for your kid, or you need to make that Costco run because the weekend is going to be crazy. I think there is openness about flexing your time. If only, we make that our minimum standard too. I try not to ask for permission. I just say okay, well, yesterday I worked 15 hours. I'm going to have to take a break today to do, to cook or to do something for my kids. And all of my editors have been supportive. They're yeah, whatever you need, it's fine. And I think there's a lot of grace out there. We just have to tap into it and feel comfortable doing that, particularly as working parents. Especially if that wasn't really part of your identity before, it can be, a difficult launch, but, we're not the same people during a pandemic, and we shouldn't pretend like we are. CeFaan, I wanted to start with this question, which came from Pia, who is one of my editors, who is so.
Who's my Media Watch coach here, by the way, so I feel it's going to be a tough question.
She had this great question last week to the bigwigs at our company, because we had a call that was sort of related about balancing work and things and home life. And she had asked, what was your worst day and how did you get through it? And that's something I think we need to acknowledge. we probably all have really bad days,
Yeah.
and perhaps really bad hours, you know, just
Yeah.
moment to moment. What's been a real struggle for you, and how did you get through it?
You know, so I don't know if I can give you like a worst day, because there, like you said, there's so many moments when you just feel like my tank is empty and how do I keep going, right? I have some memorable moments, right? When I was quarantined for 14 days, I would say the beginning and the end of it was memorable, right? Because the middle of it's pretty boring. You know, I'm 14 days alone without my family, and there's only so much you can do. There's nothing, there's nowhere to go. You can't go to the gym. Everything's closed. But the decision to quarantine was tough, right? Because, and again, I say first and foremost, it really helped that I had bosses in a company I work for who, without even a hesitation, offered above and beyond what I needed in terms of options, right? To balance the safety of my family versus my job, right? And those are inherently at conflict when you talk about field reporting, field producing, and being out there while you come home every night to see your family. Even if you shower before you see them or hug them, none of it really keeps you 100% safe, right? So I think there was really only one way to guarantee that my wife and daughter would be safe, and that was to send them away early on, whether it's somewhere upstate or to Korea, for instance, right? And you just hope that after they reach their 14 days that they're now good and they don't have to be around me. But the dilemma was that was, how long does that go on for, right? If I send them away, does a month turn into 4 months? Does it turn into 6 months? That there's no, it's all open-ended, right? There's no guarantee as to how and when this ends, right? How do I know that if I send them, let's say 3 months ago, South Korea was in good shape, but how do I know in 2 months, all of a sudden it's worse there and they can't come back, right? And as every, you know, parent of a young child knows, the phase and stage that they're in is so important. You know, my daughter was 18 months old at the time and 20 months now. And we all know that age, like 3 months is an eternity, right? I would miss so many milestones. The thought of like, you know, like right now in the past 5 months, I've seen her go from babbling words that make no sense to complete, you know, sentences. And that's just something that I don't know that I could have lived without experiencing being there for that, right? So then ultimately the decision was made, all right, we're gonna tough this out together. There are obvious risks here, right? And then we had a backup plan. If I was to be exposed or if I had potential symptoms, I would just quickly as possible remove myself from the equation and just hope and pray to God that they're okay, right? And again, when I had some symptoms, I reached out to the president of our company and my news director, and I didn't even ask for this, but they offered to put me into a hotel for 14 days. And mind you, you know, New York City hotels are not cheap, even if, you know, the pandemic or not. And, you know, every company right now is just hemorrhaging, right? So to not even worry about a budget, just automatically say, hey, whatever you need for your family, you can do. And that was something that, quite frankly, I was pleasantly surprised about. I'm not surprised to know they're really great like that, but there's no playbook for this, right? I didn't know what to expect, and it certainly exceeded what I needed, you know. And so it gave me that option, and of course, coming home, the end of it, right? I mean, after 14 days, like all I wanted to do was hug my daughter and see my wife, and so those are the memorable moments, right? The toughest is probably when you combine the emotional and the physical, right? You're out there. I think it was when in New York City when there was protesting and rioting, and the city was on fire. So now, like mentally, you've been spending months trying to protect yourself from COVID, trying to keep your family safe. And now you're out in this broiling heat, right? And in this very unsafe environment, as much as we can be safe, right? And it just sort of mixes this confluence of like two crises, right? As if you needed one more, right? And now you're physically exhausted. And there were moments, you know, I have to say, in that stretch where my body just didn't know if I could keep pushing, right? And everyone with kids knows you get up early at 6 a.m. Even if I didn't want to spend that time with my daughter, she's really loud in the morning anyways. I can't sleep in, right? So, you know, I worked a night shift sometimes, getting home after midnight, and then at 6 a.m., like, there she goes, right? And I want to be with her. So, you know, we all know as parents, like, running on no sleep is tough. And then you add these two events, and that was pretty tough, I have to admit. Yeah.
What about you, Xuan?
For me, it's a little bit different. And this is a lesson for me too, is learning about boundaries. So I, probably about a month and a half into it, my daughter, my 2-year-old, had a horrific accident. She had a really terrible accident where we ended up staying in the hospital overnight. And it was a fall. It was a terrible fall, actually. And partly it was, not partly, it was my fault. I wasn't paying attention. I was busy. My child care, we have 2 child care providers. One of them was out because she had been exposed to COVID. So she was quarantining and, you know, trying to figure out if she had it or not. And tests were so difficult and still difficult to come by. So I had this day that was a gap and I didn't have anybody. So I was like, oh, I can do this all. No problem. I can do it. So I'm answering calls, helping write a pitch and scripting and all that stuff and not paying attention to my child. And she fell and we ended up going to the emergency room and staying there overnight. And that to me was a lesson of 2 things: boundaries and being in the moment. Like, I needed to set a boundary with work and say, okay, I can't do it today because I have to take care of my child. We are going to work from home, but there are going to be days where suddenly something's going to happen. Like the plans that I have for, you know, 2 child care providers, my parents as a backup, and then like my 80-year-old neighbor as like the final, like in case of emergency, break the glass kind of thing. It doesn't work in this case. So I needed to set boundaries, and that was all self-imposed. My bosses have been great about this, but those were self-imposed things in my head where I was like, well, I can't ask for help. I can't do this. I can't do that, because I'm thinking like in a weird way, kind of like what you were saying, CeFaan, about not thinking about, of course they would offer you a hotel if you got that, but those were things that I wasn't thinking of. And then, you know, and the other thing was being in the moment. Like when I'm working, but when I'm done, part of that boundary thing is you're done. Like I need to focus and be with my children. Just because I'm home doesn't mean I'm available to work all the time. So that was probably the hardest day of all of this. I mean, as a mother, period, that was the hardest day, but also just a really important lesson that I learned.
Yeah, it can be so hard to juggle everything. And, you know, everyone's trying their best, but one thing that I found that has helped me is like try to compartmentalize. Like in the mornings, I'm sort of like watching my kids while I'm answering emails. And that seems to work okay for me, because I can stop in the middle of reading. I can stop, you know, these are sort of like quick hit emails. But when I need to write, I really need like uninterrupted, open-ended time. And the only time I have that in my life is after bedtime. So I regularly, if I have enough material to write and I need to write, I work basically from 9 till 3 a.m. and 9 p.m. to 3 a.m. And then I just pound it out, and it's really hard. And I'm actually a morning person. I am not a night owl, but I've had to just adjust. And that's the only thing that's worked for me in able to like get it in, to be able to get stuff done. You know, some people think that's really crazy, but it's the only thing that works for me. And also in some ways, like I feel better mentally, because in the morning, then I know like, okay, I can just wait for the edit. You know, it's so much more relaxing to multitask when you don't feel like you're under the gun to like actually get something really urgent done. So that's one way I've been able to do it, is try to compartmentalize my time. You know, I write at night, I do emails in the morning, and kind of everything else in between. And that has worked so far. The worry though is like, how long can I sustain this? You know, how many days can I do, you know, basically an 18-hour day over 24 hours? And, you know, before the vaccine comes, like how long am I going to do this? And I don't know the answer. I also wanted to just briefly say, because I think there is so much value in talking about when we struggle. My worst day is, you know, I have a 10-month-old and he's been really active, and there was like a 2-day period where he wasn't sleeping, cried a lot, and he's usually a very chill baby. And I was just, you know, I was like so focused on work, probably one of those days where I worked until 3 a.m. and I was just like, what is wrong with you? And I felt like I was just like really failing in my career. But then I realized that I think he wasn't eating enough. You know, I think my breast milk supply was starting to dwindle, and it didn't really occur to me because I wasn't pumping anymore because I'm working from home. And so there was sort of like no warning signs, but I was basically starving my child, and he was not, you know, he was like getting really fussy, and it just got to a point, it was a real terrible moment for me where I'm like, I only have one job, and that's to keep you alive. You know, happiness is secondary, like you have to stay alive. And I really messed up, and I felt it was probably like my worst day. And you know, you know, nobody knows how to parent during COVID. My first kid, I was out, you know, I was going to work, and things would end at a certain time and I could focus, like someone was saying, but you know, we're living at work. So it's like, I just didn't realize it. And you know, it's still something that really haunts me. And, you know, I don't know how else I could have done it. So that's been different. We're getting some traction on the chat. Chris asked, how do you carve out time for yourself between working from home and parenting? Xuan, you want to take that first?
Sure. I mean, I think you have to ask for help, right? And if you have a partner with you who can help, I think you have to make it clear to ask for that help, and make sure that they can, or if you're on your own, you know, and as a single parent, I mean, I'm lucky, I am not in that situation, so I can't really speak to that, but my own time is from 8:30 until about 9:30, which isn't a lot of time, but the girls are in bed. I can use that time to like do my Peloton app if I need to. And I've been trying to do just one small self-care thing. If it's like a 5-minute face mask, or, you know, like a glass of wine, whatever it is, like just one thing that I can do. And my husband works at night. He does the evening news for local. So I'm on my own in the evening. So I really try to just do one thing during that night once they go to bed. And then I'll go back and do work, like you were saying, Sally. Like there's that finite period of time where your house is silent and you can actually focus. And so I try to do that afterwards. And usually I'll be in bed by midnight and then up again, like you guys, 6, 7 in the morning. But that to me is the only way I can do it. I don't know what your tricks are.
Well, I don't work from home, so I can't give you that sort of perspective. But my wife always says, like, you sort of work 2 jobs. I mean, it's not nearly as hard as being responsible. I think it's telling that the 2 mothers, their worst days were when, you know, you have this mother guilt when you're probably wonderful mothers, but you feel like you've let your kid down. As a father, I have the luxury of not having to feel that way, right? And that's a complete luxury. I understand that because I have a wife who, you know, is home and dealing with that. On the flip side, I have these very long days where my first half of the day, I'm a father. You know, it's my first job. And then, you know, I go off to work. And so I guess the only thing I would say is a little sleep. You need a lot more hours in the day to get it all done. And the one thing I aim for is at least one day a week I sleep in. My wife's good about letting me catch up and recharge my battery so that the rest of the week I can kind of get up at 6 and go to bed late and do it all over again. But I do need like the one day to kind of just sleep in. And sleeping in is not like 10 hours, it's like 7 or 8, but that's a luxury, right? So I guess you just have to stop and get the rest, you know? I mean, don't push yourself till you want to collapse, because we're all there, I think, every day.
Yeah, this is like becoming a very depressing chat because none of us have answers for you. But you know, we hope like just commiserating makes you feel less alone. And you know, there are tips and tricks that are working now. But you know, we're all just doing our best. And I try to remind myself at like my most guilty mom moments, I'm like, you know, this is as best as I can do today. And you know, my husband's actually on baby leave right now, and so he's able to watch after our kids. But you know, there are just days when, you know, there's not enough hands, and it doesn't matter what we do, even on the weekends. And we have another question from Nandita about working from home with older kids. And it occurred to me that none of us have older kids, but one thing that, you know, she mentioned was, you know, letting your kids have interaction with other people. What does that look like for you guys right now? Play dates, classes?
That's
Well,
a good
I'll tell you
question.
what. So my community where I live has a lot of middle school children and high school kids. And I'll tell you what a lot of these kids are doing. I mean, and it all depends on people's comfort levels, right? Is that they're doing social bubbles.
Yeah.
So there are certain families who they know that they adhere to certain things, and they have social bubbles where the kids will play outside. you know, or if you are comfortable with it in their home. So I found that that has been helpful. And also, you know, relaxing some rules in terms of like gaming systems, screen time, things of that sort. I think everything is just kind of good enough for now. You know, I mean, I know that during normal times we want to limit screen time or we want to try to do this, but right now, I mean, I feel like there should be no, it's like no rules, right? Like
Yeah,
to
yeah.
survive this. So that's one thing. And the other thing that some of my neighbors have done too with their kids is they've come together and done little camps too. So like with families where they'll get together and like do activities for their kids, whether it's like a workout training, baseball thing or volleyball thing as my neighbors do, to whatever it is, yoga. So they offer and share skills in that way, which is a pressure on the parent to come up with that activity and the expert on that activity. But on the other hand, the other parents who are sending their kids to participate, it's great.
Yeah. My answer is a little similar, right? But I'll give you sort of like the New York City perspective, right? A few months ago when they opened the playgrounds, it was like all the parents rejoiced and the kids are back. You know, I was talking to other dads and moms the first day back, and you know, my daughter again is not in school yet, but a lot of these kids are pre-K, first grade, kindergarten, and we were just so happy because this is sort of like the best classroom there is, right? You interact with each other, they learn like, you know, rules, and they learn manners and sharing, right? The way the playgrounds look in New York, I think it's pretty good in the sense that all the parents wear their masks, right? They're pretty respectful about not going near another child without a mask, or at least asking that parent if that's okay. For the most part, I've noticed parents, and myself included, allow the kids to kind of interact. I mean, not sticking fingers in mouths, right? But they're grabbing the same things. And I think we're just kind of crossing our fingers, right? Like we just have to kind of hope that this is okay. And that's unnerving. I'm not going to lie. But you sort of have to just make a decision, right? Like I'm going to sacrifice, maybe, you know, she'll be okay, hopefully, because the immediate reward is she gets to be out, exercise, interact with kids. And of course the bubbles, right? We have maybe a handful you can count on one hand, parents with kids about the same age. And not just because we trust that they're behaving responsibly, but because we can trace it that way, right? If I were to get sick, I don't have to go down a list of 1,000 people I've interacted with, right? I can just call 4 or 5 parents and say, hey, just so you know, right? Maybe you want to be careful. And I think that's the only way to do it, right? I mean, we crave interaction as adults, imagine these kids, and I don't want to deprive her of that. And that's always the risky balance, right? Like, what are you taking away from her to keep her 100% safe? It's not really worth it in the end to have her cooped up, you know, running on the house and not meeting people at this age, right? She's 20 months old. It's so important. So we just take a risk, I guess, a calculated risk, and it's scary sometimes.
I think it's also important to, sorry, Sally, to be forthcoming with other families that you're hanging out with, because CeFaan, I know you're out in the street. My husband's still going to work. I still go out to, you know, occasionally. So I tell them before we get together, this is where we've been.
Yeah.
We have, like, if you are comfortable with it,
yeah,
we'll, you know, get together. But if you're not, here's everything. Because I just want full disclosure, because I would hate, the worst thing is if you get somebody else sick, if you're asymptomatic and you get somebody else sick. So that's
totally
something that I think we should all take responsibly as we can.
And I would even add to that one quick point to that. Sometimes like your colleagues can be a good, because you're sort of in the same boat, right? And like we're unusual in that like we're living through a pandemic, but journalists are living through it in a very unique way. And I think in some ways that's been good. Like colleagues who are in the same situation, you can sort of commiserate together, and then also know that your exposure is pretty much across the board, more or less the same. And they know that you're as comfortable as they are because you've been in the same places, right? So I think that can help.
That's a really good idea. And I do have teenage nieces and nephews. And, you know, one thing that they've done is, you know, their mom has decided, I'm comfortable with you seeing your, you know, best friend outside, you know, in this capacity, that because we know that transmission is much lower outside. And if you keep your space and things like that, you know, like my niece has you know, she's 15, she has a boyfriend. So it's like, you know, they're allowed to see each other, but they have to be outside and things like that. So I think number one, the key is to figure out what your comfort level is and with whom, you know, if your older kid has a boyfriend or a girlfriend or just a best friend that they really depend on emotionally, that's something you have to weigh. Like, can you can you go over that? You know, can you get over that? And I think being outside is a really sort of a middle ground. And I do that with my own kid. He really misses school, and my 3-year-old. And so we've had a couple of play dates where it's all outside and in our backyard or something like that. And that's been okay so far. That's one way to sort of do that. Another thing I want to plug, which is on our, if you go to Pathable, there's a file tab that has this snazzy list of tips and ideas, but there's a website I learned about called gopeer.org, and it's a sort of a mentoring buddy system homework help kind of website where college kids partner up with kids in K through 12. And I can't vouch for it because I haven't used it myself, but if you have older kids like Nandita, you know, that might be something you might look into. Obviously you should monitor and things like that, but that could be, you know, I mean, to me, it kind of feels like a modern day pen pal, like just getting to know somebody else, and even better that they can help you with your algebra homework, you know, that kind of thing. So that website could be really good. Something else that Xuan had mentioned in her comments earlier was, you know, the rules are out the window. And I see Jeremiah in the chat is saying, you know, that he's relaxed screen time, but, you know, it's a battle. And what I'll say is, you know, covering early education, I, you know, pay attention, and also as a mom with young kids, I really, you know, I really read like all of the guidelines from the American Academy of Pediatrics, because they weigh in on all sorts of stuff about child development, including screen time and quality screen time and going back to daycare and all these other things that are not exactly medical. But one thing that I always, you know, one thing that really made a difference for me when I started covering them is, you know, somebody told me like, okay, the experts who make these guidelines, they're really thinking about the welfare of children at like sort of a lowest common denominator level. You know, that when they say like kids under 2 should not have any screen time, what they're thinking about is children, you know, in underprivileged situations where if that advice didn't exist, they would watch TV 15 hours a day. And I think, you know, we hear that advice as you know, well-resourced parents with time and money to enrich our kids' lives, and we think, oh, okay, so if I give them any screen time before 2, then, you know, their minds will melt. But the truth is, we still give them plenty of enrichment, even if they have an hour of screen time before 2. I'm not advocating for a ton of screen time, but I'm saying that sometimes you have to remember that the advice that the experts give you, it's really about the welfare of children across the board, the lowest common denominator. And that's, you know, that's the same with potty training. They advocate that kids shouldn't potty train until they show absolute readiness, you know, some interest. And somebody told me once, the reason why they came up with that position, instead of, you know, you hear all these parents who say like they potty train their kids when they're like, you know, 10 days old or something. It's like, yeah, you can do it. But the reason why they advocate for something like that, and much like screen time, is they're looking at the lowest common denominator. The number one time for child abuse to occur is during potty training. You know, they're telling you to wait because they know that if they didn't give that advice, that there would be a lot of kids, you know, in struggling homes where they might get beat. So that's the difference. Like you really have to think hard about the advice that they're giving. And in some ways, you know, take it with a grain of salt. You're not going to put your kid in front of a TV for 15 hours a day. But that doesn't mean like an hour here or there is, you know, a terrible thing, because you'll be enriching their minds in other ways on the weekends, after work. You read them books, you know, do workshops, whatever, you know, that type of the workbooks. So the rules, I think that has been like really eye-opening for me to think about, you know, the rules are for the lowest common denominator. And if you can rise above it 90% of the time you're with your kids, then the 10% you can relax on yourself, because you're not, you know, the parenting is never really about like one big decision. It's usually about a lot of little decisions over time. So, you know, for that, that's what I have to say about the rules, is that the rules are out the window. And even when they were in vogue, you know, there is some caveats to who it applies to most.
And I would add to that, a parent who's now fully focused because maybe you had to put him in front of the screen for half an hour because you had to deal with a work situation, is a better child, right? Because it's sometimes, so every now and then there's an issue that comes up outside of, you know, your normal working hours, right? And you tell yourself, okay, if I can distract her for just long enough and I can deal with this, then put that aside and give her back my full attention. I know I'm sort of like justifying this, but I really do think that it's better off than being not present, to a point that you made earlier, right? All day long because you got this on your mind. Sometimes you just gotta do what you have to do and get it out the way.
And just one more thing, like I'd read this article ages ago, and I'm trying to find it, and I'll send it when I do, but we're in a world now where screens are prolific. You know, how we grew up is not the same as how our kids are growing up. Everything in their lives are going to be, you know, digital, screen, everything. I mean, I just think of Star Trek every time I think of their future. So, you know, this isn't, and this article, and I'll look for it, is saying that screen time isn't all bad, because you need to teach them how to adapt to this new, what their future will look like. You know, they're not going to be, you know, with pen and paper for the rest of their lives. It will be all screens. So there is some benefit to that. And also, you know, not all screen time is equal. There's some, as Sally mentioned too, there's some great apps for learning. And my 4-year-old knows a lot about salamanders because of Khan Academy, and she loves those, the animal tutorials. And so for me, that's one less thing that I have to worry about in terms of going through her homeschooling and her Zoom and her lessons, is that there are apps that help with that and help keep her engaged in a fun, educational way.
Yeah, I feel like my kid, his vocabulary has like gone off the charts. In, you know, he does have a pretty sophisticated vocabulary, and I think it's from watching Daniel Tiger, which is, you know, it is sort of like on the good list of TV, of screen time, from all the way down to the American Academy of Pediatrics. They, you know, Sesame is legit, Daniel Tiger is legit. There are things that, you know, that even the experts say do teach kids, you know, has proven to help kids learn social emotional skills that they otherwise wouldn't. Like, don't forget, Sesame Street was created because the creators were worried that kids who weren't going to daycare or preschool in low-income communities, that they would not have that development before they went to kindergarten. That was the you know, that was the root of Sesame Street. And that's why when you watch it, you know, it was really groundbreaking at the time, because it shows, you know, people of color, it's an urban environment. I mean, this was for kids who otherwise wouldn't have daycare, which is pretty much most kids right now. So, you know, Sesame Street is not paying me to say this, but I just know from doing the research, like it's not all bad, and you can be discerning. And
I say that I learned English from Sesame Street, so who knows if that's or not. But
There you go.
Vicky had a question. Are there any productivity tips and tools that you've turned to during all this to cheat some more time out of the day without sacrificing quality of your work? Xuan, you want to start with that?
Screen time.
Legalize screen time, as I say.
Productivity. No, I mean, I just use the very early morning, where I actually have, my husband we kind of worked a deal. So it's just the schedule where I mean, I just know that from 8 to 11, I have to really focus and get as much as I can done, whether it's pitching or organizing or whatever. And then the evening, I cheat with the evenings, where, you know, after 9:30, I can continue to research stories, answer emails that I didn't get to in the day. You know, with what I do, I'm constantly pitching stories, so I'm always looking for ideas, and it's hard to for ideas in the traditional sense when during the schedule. So for me, those are the time shifts are different now. And then of course during the day, you're just putting out fires, but I just have to carve out those times early in the morning and late at night for me to really be able to do it. I mean, you're not getting, I think that's the struggle here, right? Is that you don't have that time, that dedicated like 9 to 5 or whatever, when you walk into the office or you walk into the field or whatever, to when you end your shift, so to speak, that there's none of that delineation. So it's just, for me, and I'm very bad at time management, is dedicating those hours.
Well, I mean, my daughter still naps 2 hours, and I only have one child. So in the same vein, I get like 2 hours in the middle of the day where I can, okay, knock some things out. But then again, if she doesn't want to nap that day, curveball, right? So
So selfish of her. I would say, you know, one of the big things in my family dynamic is like, I'm in charge of all the food because I love grocery shopping. I love cooking. I prep my kids' food meals. My older son actually has food allergies. So, you know, we've always had to be very meticulous about meal planning. And when I say we, I mean me. And one thing that has happened is that like we are leftover central. You know, I cook on Saturday and Sundays. We reheat food all throughout the day so that lunch can be, you know, sort of seamless. And you know, frozen fruit and vegetables like save us all the time because we don't, you know, nobody grocery shops every week or as often as they used to. So I always, you know, when I make my Costco run, I always make sure to get extra fruit and veggies that I know my son will like. That, you know, we can eat. And that has like, that saved me so many times where, you know, something comes up, I really got to be busy, but I know I can like make sure they're fed and kept alive physically by doing that, you know. And my husband is, I love leftovers. I can eat leftovers every day, which we do, but my husband is not that kind of person. So he has to mix it up. He's like, some days he's like, fine, you guys can eat leftovers. I have to have a grilled cheese sandwich or something like that. But, you know, the focus on kids and in a lot of ways, it gives me comfort. That is like still the one thing I can do consistently because I have to. So, and I try to maximize my time cooking because I feel like that could take all day and I would lose my entire weekend doing that. And so one thing I've started doing is like on Sundays, I will prep like carrots. My kid will eat carrots. I prep carrots while I'm cooking something simple for lunch, maybe a stir fry. And then while I'm doing all that, in between all that, I prep something for the slow cooker that I start then, and then dinner's ready. And then I don't have to cook, you know, in the evening. So then, you know, that multitasking in the kitchen has really helped me. It does take a lot of effort to meal plan and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, like I will say the ROI like is good. It always works out. I never have to worry about my kids being hungry or myself. You know, I remember when I used to go in the newsroom, if I didn't bring lunch, I just wouldn't eat because I would get busy. And now it's nice to know, okay, I can just pop something in the fridge and it's nutritious and I feel good about it. So that's one way I've been able to maximize my day, my days, you know, breakfast, lunch, dinner. I know we can get through it. And that's a huge weight off my shoulders most of the time. So I would say that that's one of my tricks to getting more out of the workday.
Can I just say, like, it's mind-boggling to hear that and know that like the average mom struggles with this every day. You know, my own wife who doesn't have to work and balance that, but it's still like, it is so stressful to think about 3 meals a day, right? And somebody else. And I would suggest to the fathers, like what I did, I don't really like cooking, I'm not into it, but I took it up because one, it was like a way to alleviate some pressure off of her, but it was also like to sort of understand like how hard this is, right? And you don't really understand how hard this is until you do it. And then I say the second part of that is like, let your partner, husband, wife, like take out every now and then, perhaps more than you used to, right? Like it's like, I can feel like the relief that when I tell her, hey, let's just order out tonight, right? You don't have to worry about, you know, this meal, the prep, the cleanup, like it's just hours and hours of responsibility, right? And I just think that as a partner, husband and wife, we can do our part to make it a little easier for the other. I mean, the argument I make is we're not eating out anyways, we're not spending money anywhere anyways. Let's help the local businesses and take out and, you know, let mom have a few extra hours off tonight. You know, I mean, all those little things add up, right? Every day, 3 times a day. And then you're gonna feed yourself too. It's
And they
nonstop.
eat much more when they're not at daycare. It's like,
Yeah.
it was kind of a surprise at first. I was like, wow, we are not, you know, we're going through a lot more food than usual.
Yeah.
It's like, oh yeah, because the school used to feed you for 2/3 of the day. And so, yeah, I mean, that was, you know, a point of stress for
Hard.
me. We'd go through food before the end of the week and I'm like, oh, we gotta go back to the grocery store where the germs are. So, but yeah, you know, that's one thing that's worked for me. And yeah, you know, we order out too. And it's been, you know, it's been okay. Like, it's almost like a treat, you know, sometimes I feel like this is the only treat I get. I'm going to eat the pizza.
Yeah.
So it's okay to have treats.
Michelle,
Michelle.
thing too is to let things go. Like I was trying to do laundry every week, you know, do the grocery store. And I finally was like, you know what? I have enough clothes to get me through 2 weeks. I'll do it every 2 weeks.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to vacuum every week, or I'm not going to do this every week. And I'll order my groceries and have it delivered. So I think there is a little bit of forgiveness for yourself in that your schedule isn't going to be the same. It can wait. There are things that can wait to give you your quality of life and also quality of your work without sacrificing your work, right?
I often present that to my husband as like, okay, is this mission critical? He loves to do yard work, and so he'll just be like, I gotta mow the lawn today, I gotta mow every 5 days. And I often ask him, like, is it mission critical? Will is this important? Do we need this? And I used to get kind of annoyed with him, but actually I realized like he sort of needed it. It was like exercise, it was being outside, it was working with his hands. And so I finally was just like, okay, you want to mow every 5 days? Fine. That's your thing. So there's just like so much adjustment with your spouse and with your kids. It's like you really have to weigh all of, how you live your life, every aspect of it every day, and know that all of it is changing. Our kids are changing. What they were into now, it's been 5 months, what they were into 5 months ago is fine, like just totally different people already. And so we gotta, roll with the punches and not blame ourselves for having to change our minds. I put this in the tip sheet, like it's okay to change your mind. If you decide today you feel comfortable sending them back to daycare, that's fine. And if you decide, 5 days from now that you don't feel comfortable anymore, it's fine to take them out too. It doesn't mean that you failed in one way or the other. It just means the dynamics of your kid and your preferences are changing, and that's okay.
That's a good point. I wanted to add one thing, like, so pre-K, we took my daughter out and we asked him, hey, can we just reassess in 6 months, right? I think you have to be prepared that everything is changing all the time. And we didn't make any final decision. It was just, can we just wait, and then reassess?
Living hour by hour, guys. That's Michelle, our lovely Madam President Michelle, has asked, what do we wish we could say to non-parent colleagues who may not get it? How can non-parent colleagues do better? And how can AJ be a resource to us as parents juggling during COVID? Xuan, you want to start?
Sure, I'll start with, actually, I'm going to flip it a little bit because I had a conversation recently with a colleague who's young, in her 20s, and single, and doesn't have a family, and lives on her own in New York. And she's really lonely, right? Like incredibly lonely. She isolated in New York on her own, works from home, and had no resources. I mean, she had, the contacts that we all have, but it wasn't like we had where I have a family and I'm focused on this and I'm so busy that I just couldn't even think about it. And I didn't have that support system. So I think it's hard on everybody in different ways, right? So I think conversely, there are parents who don't get what single young people are getting through right now too, because you're on your own in many large cities. And that's tough too, to be on your own and not have that support system that I have. I have 2 little ones to keep me distracted during the most stressful times. And I think that leads to my other point, is to have empathy for each other right now. We just really need to be as empathetic as possible to what everyone is going through and recognize that each of us has our own struggle, and we need to forgive each other just as much as we forgive ourselves for what we can and can't do right now, which is so much easier said than done, especially in our industry where it's like, we need to do this now. In fact, we needed to do it 5 minutes ago. Like, now is too late, right? But I think there has to be a little bit of forgiveness in that and understanding in that. And I mean, to be more direct to your question, Michelle, I think as parents, I think we just need more flexible time. Like, you need to understand, or people need to understand that my most productive hours are, like Stefan said, during nap time, early in the morning, and late at night. I can get to it and I can make it work during the other periods and it'll be great, but the quality of my work will not be the same as it is from 8 to 10 in the morning, nap time, and then 8:30 until whatever it is that you need at night. So I think that flexibility and understanding of flexibility helps from my perspective.
Yeah, I mean, I would only add something quick to that, is that in my circumstance, even pre-pandemic, if my wife got sick, I need to call out, right? Because she's the sole caretaker of my daughter. And look, again, fortunately, I work for a company that's very understanding about that. But if there's other companies out there or bosses or colleagues, from my unique perspective, like that's an issue, right? And especially during the pandemic, if she were to get sick, like that's a whole nother level of stress, because there's, all kinds of possibilities there. But it comes down to that for me, right? Like I can only make this work because she's as great as she is. The minute she's down for the count, I got to step in, right? And there's nothing I can do about that. We don't have a babysitter. Even if it was pre-pandemic, we weren't a babysitter family. But in today's COVID world, who's got, unless you've had a nanny from before, sort of continuing, you're not going to call some random person all of a sudden and say, hey, can you fill in for a day, right? So it's just tough. Like there's no one else to rely on except for the people under your roof. To the point you made earlier, we all have parents who are older and you don't want to expose them. That's not an option, right? Like that's a unique situation where grandparents are no longer an option, and they're such a huge resource for parents, but nowadays they're not. And so if people can understand that would be great, right? Like we don't have the same resources and the same support system as you might have had 5 months ago.
One thing I'll say also about this is that, not just colleagues, but the powers, like the bosses. I think it would be a mistake for a leader or a colleague to think that, having kids handicaps us, because look at us. We are working till 3 a.m. to file that dang story for you. Like we are working as hard. We just need the flexibility to do it when we can, while juggling also our families. That's not a negotiable. We have to do that. And I would hate it for anyone to see this, see it as a detriment, because as Xuan, was saying earlier, like we help shape coverage, me as a mom, and also with my expertise as an education reporter covering early ed, these are important things. And I hope that is stressed at the management level. You can't just have single 30-year-old, 25-year-olds doing the news, like diversity in family situations, diversity in ages. Those are all important things. And, we should respect that that those are important contributions to the diversity of the newsroom. And, hopefully that nobody sees this as somehow, we're too distracted. We shouldn't get the big story. We shouldn't get the big job. We are obviously making it work. Otherwise we wouldn't still be here. And so I would say, if that could be impressed upon newsroom colleagues and also, newsroom bosses, I think that would be important, because too often, so I was saying earlier, too often when people get to this sort of mid-career level that we are at, that's when they have kids, and that's also when they leave the newsroom, because, that's a problem. We can't, the news business is demanding. Parents can respond to those demands. We just need it a little bit different. We just have different needs to make that happen.
I would say not only does it not handicap us, it proves that we have a higher threshold for pain. We're battle tested.
Oh my God, true that. I'm just scrolling through the chat, and I hope the motherhood and career session went well. I know it went right before ours. Let me see here. Yeah.
There's in there about elderly parents and taking care of them, because caretaking can, go. And I think especially within our community, there is a tradition to take care of our parents. And part of the reason why I moved back to Florida from New York and DC is because my parents live here. And they're in their mid to late 70s, and we were seeing each other fairly regularly. But during the pandemic, not only was I taking care of my own family, but I told my parents, do not go out. I will do all your grocery shopping for you. I did all their grocery shopping for them, would leave it at their door. I would go do whatever errand they had to do. And so I think there are different forms of caretaking and caregiving. And we should be, as I think Indira pointed out, we should be much more aware of those aspects too, and those pressures as well, because
if I can add to that and sort of wrap in 2 points, right, about elderly parents and also what you need from your newsroom. So I have a perfect example tomorrow. My parents are both mid-70s and older. My father's particularly vulnerable. He's, had plenty of surgeries and heart conditions, Lyme disease, strokes, you name it. And my mom cares for him. And so, I have a little family emergency where she, hurt herself. And I don't want someone else in the house, right, because of COVID. So, I asked for a sick day tomorrow, and graciously, again, my company understands, just so I can make a day trip down to Philadelphia so that I can just get them squared away. If that means going to the store for them, right? Because as much as I don't want to be, in their house either, and I won't be in the house, I don't want a stranger doing it. And who else can they rely on, right? So if a company or coworkers understand, it's not just your kids, right? Like, we have to care for, in some cases, our elderly parents who otherwise don't have many options either. And if they can understand that, that goes a long way.
And we're sort of running out of time now. It's been a great chat. I just want to plug one more time our tip sheet, because I included a lot of free apps, free resources, Buy Nothing group. I have to plug that because I've gotten so much good stuff for my kids from there. I got a bouncy house, toy kitchen, and train table. I mean, there's just tons of free stuff out there that can help you, get through the day with, if I didn't have a ton of toys at my house, but now I do. So, make sure you guys tap into those kind of resources. The internet is full of free, coloring pages and, Sudoku, whatever your kid's into. Even just this week, I heard that, the zoo does these our zoo does these educational videos where they feed otters and teach them about otters. And, the Science Museum has videos here and there about things that they have at the museum. So I think there's a lot of resources out there for kids as you guys, navigate this. And some of this, it's just like a distraction for your kids. They need enrichment and nourishment. And there's tons of stuff online, and I hope you guys will take a look at that. Any other parting thoughts, guys?
I want to add one thing. I know it's very stressful during this time, and I think being a parent is uniquely stressful as well, or caring for elderly parents as well. But if anyone needs to talk or just decompress, feel free to reach out. I'm happy to do a Zoom happy hour and listen, or whatever you need. Because I think that's the other thing that we really need to not forget, is that we need to rely on each other for this too, because it's not hard. It takes a village to raise kids, but it also takes a village for parents to survive. So I'm here.
Me too. I'm here too. It's interesting. And Paul, our maestro, had mentioned that, what can AJ do? And I think one thing that, at the start of this, when we were putting this panel together, we had asked, does AJ know how many working parents there are? And I think I'd love to see, self-reported data, like how many of us are parents and at what, career level are we in? Because I, hope it doesn't feel like there's a lot of us, and maybe if we knew some more concrete numbers that we could get together and, like Xuan said, have our little tribe and be able to work through our unique problems as Asian American parents during a pandemic, and dealing with it all. So that might be something if AJ could facilitate. I think we'd be interested in assisting with that too. All right, guys. So just one last minute. Thanks so much, everyone, for listening in. It was a good conversation, and we're all doing our best. And I just want to make sure that the last thing I say on this call is, and my other panelists will speak too, but the last thing I want to say on this call is our kids love us so much. Even when we're mean to them, even when we're hard on them, never forget, there's just no way that your kids don't love you while you're dealing with this, even on your worst day. I know even when I wasn't feeding my kid enough, I know he still really loved me. So don't forget that. And I hope that helps sustain you as you, go on in this unending pandemic. Any other last parting words, Xuan?
No, I mean, it's just tough, right? And we're not alone. I always tell my wife, it's everyone else is going through the same thing. Just remember that.
Thank you guys for spending your time with us.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
Please fill out the survey, and we'll all drop our emails there in case you guys want to follow up or have any questions.
Sally, if you're not feeding me, I don't know if I will love you.